I've missed so many moments with my mother. I've missed getting ready with her for proms. I missed having her when I got my driver's license. I've missed her at birthdays and Christmases and Thanksgivings. I missed her at my high school graduation, and I missed her on the day I moved into college. I'm begging you to give her mercy so that I don't have to miss more. I want her at my birthdays in the future. I want her there when I get married, when I have kids, if I'm able. I want her there for all the major milestones in my life that I have left.
This jury has already found that your mother killed your father. You understand that?
Yes, I do.
And you loved your father, correct?
Yes.
Do you have any malice or hatred or anything along those lines to your mother because of that?
No, I love her so much, and that just hasn't changed.
Okay, thank you.
28-year-old Michael Brandon Cochran was a youth coach, a father of two, a husband of 19 years. On the 11th of February 2019, he died in a hospice bed without ever waking up. The death certificate said natural causes. His wife held a small private graveside service 2 days later and got back to business. It would take 6 years, 2 exhumations, a federal fraud conviction, a jury of 12, and the morning his wife handed her best friend's son's insulin into a kitchen where Michael was already collapsing on the floor to finally prove what really happened. This is the case of Michael Brandon Cochran and the wife who watched him die on the kitchen floor and told everyone he just needed to sleep it off.
He wasn't sick. He wasn't ready to die. He was healthy.
By midday of February 6th of 2019, he had lost consciousness, and he would never regain consciousness.
The thief, the liar, the taker of life, and the doer of evil deeds.
Michael Brandon Cochran was born on the 23rd of December, 1980 in Beckley, West Virginia. His mother, Donna, would later remarry a kind, quiet man named Edward Bolt, and Michael adored his stepfather, simply calling him Dad. From a young age, Michael was a born athlete. He got his first set of barbells at the age of 10. He played football and baseball, and by high school, he was a state-level powerlifter. He would go on to study at West Virginia University, eventually working in IT. But what people in Daniels remembered most about him wasn't his career. It was the way he showed up for the children in his community. He coached youth football and youth baseball in the Shady Spring area for years. Parents trusted him with their kids. Kids loved him. His mother, Donna, would later describe him as her precious son. His best friend, attorney Chris Davis, said Michael was the kind of person who made you feel like you'd known him your entire life within the first 5 minutes of meeting him. He had met his future wife when he was about 17. She was working at the register of a sporting goods store in West Virginia. Her name was Natalie Jessup. Donna remembered watching the flirtation play out at the till. By November 1999, they were engaged. By May 2000, they were married. For the next 2 decades, by every external measure, they appeared to be a model Appalachian family. They had 2 children, their daughter, Nicole, their son, Ashton. They settled into a comfortable home on 4H Lake Drive in Daniels. They went to the kids' games. They had family dinners. They holidayed in Hawaii and Paris. They drove nice cars. They had a 1965 Shelby Cobra replica parked in the garage. For a young couple from rural West Virginia, life was good. From the outside, life was exceptional. Natalie Page Jessup, born in November 1980, was bright, driven, and academically focused. She earned her Doctor of Pharmacy from West Virginia University in 2005. She worked at a Rite Aid pharmacy in Oak Hill, where she eventually became a preceptor, training newly graduated pharmacists. She earned around $120,000 a year. She marketed herself as a diabetes specialist and a certified diabetes educator. She was so trusted in this area that her neighbors, the Davis family, named her as the emergency insulin contact for their young son, who was a type 1 diabetic. If anything happened at school, Natalie Cochran was the woman the school nurse would call. In 2017, she walked away from Rite Aid. She told everyone she was going into business for herself. She had founded 2 government contracting firms, Technology Management Solutions, known as TMS, and Tactical Solutions Group, known as TSG. She told friends and family that her companies had multi-million-dollar contracts with the United States Department of Defense. She talked numbers that nobody in Daniels had ever heard before. She told people her company was worth $500 million. Friends believed her. Why wouldn't they? She was a pharmacist. She had a doctorate. They lived well. She seemed to know exactly what she was doing. Investor Tony McCall later described one onboarding moment that should have been a flashing red light. Natalie required new employees to watch the 2016 film War Dogs, the story of 2 young Miami men who scammed their way into Pentagon contracts. The men in that film go to prison at the end of it. McCall recalled telling Natalie, with a confused laugh, that those guys went to jail. Natalie just smiled. Tony McCall's own husband had died of leukemia. So when Natalie, months later, told Tony she had stage 3 leukemia and flipped her hair forward to show a bald patch in the back of her head, Tony knew. She knew leukemia is not described in stages. She knew the patch looked shaved, not chemotherapy thinned. She knew in that moment exactly what Natalie Cochran was. She did not yet know how far it would go. It would later be confirmed that her 2 companies had never won a single federal contract. Not one. Every claim she had made about her business empire was a lie. But for now, in 2017 and 2018, the lie was holding. The investors were coming. And Michael, working his IT job and coaching the kids, had no idea what his wife was actually doing in her office every day. A Ponzi scheme is a confidence trick where new investor money is used to pay returns to earlier investors. There is no real product, no real profit, just a moving stream of cash that has to keep moving because the moment it stops, the whole structure collapses. Between June 2017 and August 2019, Natalie Cochran ran one of the largest Ponzi schemes in West Virginia history. She defrauded at least 11 individual investors and several institutional ones out of approximately $2.5 million. She fabricated contract numbers. She forged emails she claimed were from federal employees, banking officials, a fictitious Federal Reserve employee, and even from the office of U.S. Senator Joe Manchin. She blamed delays on a federal government shutdown. When pressed, she invented a cancer diagnosis, telling investors she had lymphocytic leukemia. Even from the office of U.S. Senator Joe Manchin. She blamed delays on a federal government shutdown. When pressed, she invented a cancer diagnosis, telling investors she had lymphocytic leukemia. The family physician who supposedly treated her, Dr. Zachary Halsey, would later testify that he had never diagnosed her with anything of the kind. The list of victims was almost too painful to read. It included her own parents, her sister, Penny Lowry, who lost around $50,000, her neighbors, her husband's parents, Donna and Ed Bolt, friends from the Youth Baseball League, where Natalie also served as treasurer, Youth Baseball League's accounts in a single night, with charges to TJ Maxx and to Olive Garden. She used the money for the Shelby Cobra, paid for in May 2018 with a $37,500 cash withdrawal. She used it for diamond hoop earrings worth more than $14,000. She used it for $21,904 worth of firearms, Yamaha motorcycles, TVs, 3 properties. The lifestyle that everyone in Daniels assumed was funded by booming federal contracts was, in fact, funded by family and friends, none of whom knew that the money they handed her was being recycled to pay the people she had defrauded the year before. On a December 2018 loan application, she claimed personal assets of more than $523 million. The real number was a small fraction of that. The empire was a paper shell with one woman holding it together. When she pitched her own mother-in-law, Donna Bolt, on investing the family's retirement savings, she sealed it with a single line. She told Donna that her own mother had already received $60,000 in returns. Donna handed over $245,600. By early 2019, the paper was running out. An investor was demanding a face-to-face meeting at a Bank of America branch in Lynchburg, Virginia, to physically verify the hundreds of millions Natalie claimed was sitting in TSG's accounts, built for the 6th of February 2019. A small chartered plane was booked. Michael was going to be on that flight. Tell us before we go any further. The investors had her own mother's returns waved in front of them. They watched her drive a Shelby Cobra to a youth baseball game where she was the treasurer. If you can name a bigger investment red flag than the founder making employees watch War Dogs as a training video, drop it below. The countdown had started. For Michael Cochran, the morning of the 5th of February 2019 was unremarkable. According to lead prosecutor Tom Truman, who would describe him to a jury years later, Michael was a 200-pound, healthy, 38-year-old man on that day. He had no diagnosed illness, no diabetes, no heart condition that anyone knew about. What almost nobody knew at the time was that, months earlier, Michael had told a friend something strange. He thought he was being poisoned. The friend remembered the conversation. He had not known what to say. Natalie, however, was making moves. On the 4th of February, she had texted her friend Stephanie Hamilton, a physician's assistant, asking about an injectable steroid. Stephanie offered to administer it for her. Natalie declined, saying she would handle it herself. The same day, she filled a prescription for Xanax. On the 5th of February, she went to Access Health in Daniels and saw Dr. Zachary Halsey, complaining of flu symptoms. She tested negative for influenza. She tested negative for strep throat. He sent her home. That evening, the Cochran household went to bed. The flight to Lynchburg was set for the morning. By dawn on the 6th of February, that flight had been cancelled. Around 9:30 a.m., Natalie texted her neighbor and close friend, Jennifer Davis. She told Jennifer that both she and Michael were unwell. She said she was on high-dose steroids. She mentioned that her own blood sugar reading was 280, alarmingly high, and she asked if Jennifer could spare some of her son's insulin. Jennifer Davis did not hesitate. Her son was a type 1 diabetic, and Natalie was the woman the family trusted with his care. Jennifer sent over a vial of Humalog, a fast-acting insulin. Her husband, Chris, dropped it off at the Cochran home on his way to work that morning. By around midday on the 6th of February, Michael Cochran was unconscious on his kitchen floor. The most uncomfortable question in this case is the one almost nobody puts on screen. How does a 200-pound former powerlifter, fully conscious, end up taking a fatal dose of insulin from his own wife on a Wednesday morning in his own kitchen? The trial record offers an answer. 2 days before Michael collapsed, Natalie filled a prescription for Xanax. Xanax is a benzodiazepine. Michael Cochran had a documented allergy to benzodiazepines. When he was admitted to Raleigh General that night, his blood work showed traces of benzodiazepine in his system. Prosecutors did not allege the exact mechanism. They did not need to. But the chemistry tells a story. A man who was sedated first and injected second. Natalie Cochran was a pharmacist. Natalie Cochran specialized in diabetes. Natalie Cochran knew exactly how much insulin a 200-pound non-diabetic body could handle. And on the morning of the 6th of February, the woman who had spent 20 years being trusted with other people's prescriptions was alone in a kitchen with her husband, a benzodiazepine he was allergic to, and a vial of fast-acting insulin that had been borrowed under a lie. What happened next? She controlled. At 12:21 p.m., Natalie sent a text to Jason Bowen, a contractor who had been doing work at the property. She asked him to come over. When Bowen and his colleague Jonathan Miller arrived, what they found made no sense to them. Michael was curled into the fetal position under a kitchen cabinet, completely unresponsive. Miller performed a sternum rub, the kind of pressure point response paramedics use to test for consciousness. Michael let out a faint, low groan. He did not wake up. Both men offered immediately to drive Michael to the hospital. Natalie said no. She told them calmly that he just needed to sleep it off. Around 1 p.m., Natalie texted Jennifer Davis a photograph of her unconscious husband on the floor. In the same exchange, she reported a blood glucose reading of 145, well within normal range. That number would later be contradicted by the hospital's own readings. Visitors came, visitors went. At one point, while Michael lost control of his bowel and bladder, Natalie and her sister Penny changed his clothes on the floor. Stephanie Hamilton, the physician's assistant, arrived at the house and immediately understood that something was severely wrong. She begged Natalie to take Michael to a hospital. She named them Raleigh General, Charleston Area Medical Center, Princeton Community. Natalie said no to every single one. Stephanie's husband, John Hamilton, a West Virginia state trooper, called as a friend to check in. He was told the same thing. Michael would sleep it off. Multiple people walked into that house that day. A contractor, a physician's assistant, a state trooper's wife. None of them called 911. If you'd been there, in that kitchen, looking at a man on the floor who would not wake up, would you have picked up the phone? Tell us in the comments. Hours passed. Michael did not wake up. It was only in the evening, when his best friend Chris Davis finally arrived, that someone overruled her. Chris took one look at Michael and refused to listen. He picked him up, carried him out, and personally drove him to Raleigh General Hospital. When Michael was admitted that night, his blood glucose was recorded at 21. To put that number into perspective, a normal blood sugar in a healthy non-diabetic adult sits between 80 and 100. A reading of 21 should not be physiologically possible without something causing it. He was intubated. He was given dextrose. He was transferred in the early hours of the 7th of February to Charleston Area Medical Center, where doctors confirmed he had suffered massive cerebral edema, hypokalemia, and severe hypoglycemia. Critically, no C-peptide test was performed before glucose was administered. A C-peptide test can distinguish between insulin produced by the body and insulin injected from the outside. Without it, the chemical fingerprint of any external insulin was lost. Michael never regained consciousness. Donna Bolt had been a registered nurse for 30 years. If she had been told what was happening that morning, she would have called an ambulance herself. She was not told. She did not see the photograph of her son slumped on a hospital bed until almost 10 p.m. that night, when her husband walked into their bedroom and handed her the phone. The next morning, when Donna tried to drive to her son's bedside, Natalie sent her to the wrong hospital. 2 Charleston area medical centers exist. Donna went to the one Michael was not in. By the time she arrived at the correct hospital, hours had been lost. Donna and Ed described an unforgettable moment at his bedside. When a nurse performed a sternum rub, Michael responded faintly, and his parents began to cry with hope. Donna later said that Natalie's reaction at that moment was one of horror, not relief. Horror. Jennifer Davis would later tell prosecutors something even darker. She said Natalie had asked her at the hospital if she would help hold a pillow over Michael's face. Natalie said she did not like seeing him this way. Even as her husband lay dying, Natalie was attempting to sell 49% of TSG, her fictitious company, for $4.9 million from his hospital room. She also texted Donna Bolt, the woman whose retirement she had stolen, about a new contract opportunity she was bidding on. Her son, the woman's son, was on a ventilator 1 floor down. Holding a joint medical power of attorney with Chris Davis, Natalie eventually moved Michael to Bowers Hospice House in Beckley. He died there on the 11th of February, 2019. He was 38 years old. The original death certificate listed natural causes. There was no funeral. Per a request Michael had made years earlier, only a small private graveside service was held at Sunset Memorial Park. For now, the world believed the official version. A fit, healthy man had simply collapsed and died. The first cracks appeared not in a homicide investigation, but in a financial one. By the spring of 2019, investors were demanding their money back, and Natalie had no money to give them. One by one, the people she had defrauded began to compare notes. By the summer, multiple complaints had reached federal investigators, and the Secret Service, the FBI, and the FDIC's Office of Inspector General were all looking at TMS and TSG. 3 months after Michael's death, Natalie launched something called the Coach Michael Cochran Legacy Scholarship. She promised 8 local students full-ride scholarships, 8 years of schooling, and $7,500 each in personal spending money. She told the parents to cancel their student loan applications. She had it covered. The scholarships did not exist. The money did not exist. The parents found out in the summer. On the 25th of June 2019, federal agents executed a search warrant at the home on 4H Lake Drive. Inside the kitchen refrigerator, they found a vial of insulin. An FBI forensic examiner, Earl Gleam, would later testify that the rubber stopper of that vial had a single defect through the center, consistent with a puncture mark that went all the way through. He could not scientifically say when the puncture had been made, but it was there. The insulin vial was logged into evidence. On the 24th of September 2019, a federal grand jury in Beckley returned a sealed 26-count indictment against Natalie Cochran. The charges included wire fraud, bank fraud, aggravated identity theft, money laundering, bankruptcy fraud, and false oath in bankruptcy. 2 days later, on the 26th of September, she was arrested. It was at this point that the Bolts started asking the question nobody had wanted to ask out loud. If their daughter-in-law had been lying about everything, what else had she lied about? In September 2019, Michael's body was exhumed under a sealed order. A pathologist, Dr. Piotr Kubicek, found moderate decomposition and was unable to determine an exact cause of death. He ruled both cause and manner of death undetermined. In January 2021, the death certificate was formally amended. It no longer said natural, it said undetermined. On the 18th of March 2021, Natalie Cochran appeared before U.S. District Judge Frank W. Volk for sentencing on her federal fraud conviction. She had pleaded guilty in September 2020 to 1 count of wire fraud and 1 count of unlawful monetary transaction. Judge Volk handed down 11 years and 3 months in federal prison. He ordered approximately $2.6 million in restitution. He described what he had read in the case file as one of the most complex and practiced frauds the court had ever seen. He also said something else about her conduct at her husband's hospital bedside. He said that even while her husband lay dying, she was attempting to continue the perpetration of her extensive fraud. in a more robust and thoughtful way. In November 2021, Raleigh County prosecutors secured a first-degree murder indictment against Natalie Cochran. By April 2023, that indictment had been dismissed without a prejudice, so that prosecutors could pursue a second exhumation and additional forensic analysis. By the time Michael's body was exhumed for the second time, the soft tissue evidence that might have contained insulin was gone. He was, by then, skeletal remains. A new pathologist was brought in, Dr. Paul Uribe, a former Armed Forces medical examiner who had recently worked the high-profile insulin homicide cases at the Clarksburg Veterans Affairs Medical Center. He reviewed every record, every lab value, every hospital chart. On the 24th of October, 2023, a fresh grand jury returned a fresh indictment. Natalie Cochran was charged with the first-degree murder of her husband. Jury selection began on the 13th of January, 2025, in Raleigh County Circuit Court. Prosecuting was Tom Truman. Defending was Matthew Victor. The case was almost entirely circumstantial. No eyewitness, no surviving insulin in Michael's body, no confession. What the state had instead was a number: 21. Tom Truman told the jury to remember two figures: 0, the amount of evidence that Michael had ever known about his wife's Ponzi scheme, and 21, the impossible blood sugar reading that had ended his life. Assistant Prosecutor Ashley Accord put it more bluntly. On the 6th of February, Natalie Cochran had two choices: come clean or take him out. The witnesses came in one after another. Jennifer Davis testified to handing over the vial of her son's insulin. Jason Bowen described finding Michael curled on the kitchen floor and being told he just needed to sleep. Stephanie Hamilton described pleading for hospital transport and being refused. Chris Davis took the stand, and Timothy Bledsoe testified that Natalie had given 3 contradictory accounts of the 6th of February. He also told the jury something striking. A text had been sent from Michael's own phone hours after he was already unconscious. Someone else had been holding it. Dr. Diane Krieger, a Miami endocrinologist, told the court that a glucose level of 21 in a healthy non-diabetic adult could be credibly explained only by external insulin. Dr. Paul Uribe agreed. The defense pivoted to Michael's supplements and steroids, calling him a ticking time bomb. The Cochran children both testified for their mother. Their daughter, Nicole, by then 20 years old, described her father's daily supplement regimen as the size of a dinner plate. When Nicole stepped down from the witness stand, Natalie smiled at her and mouthed 3 words: "I love you." Court watchers would later debate whether it was a mother's love or a final act of manipulation, performed in real time in front of a jury that was already watching her hands. Natalie Cochran did not take the stand. Closing arguments were delivered on the 29th of January, 2025. The jury was 8 women and 4 men. They had no eyewitness, no surviving insulin, no confession. They retired at lunchtime. Before we tell you what they decided, what's your verdict? First-degree murder or reasonable doubt? Drop it below. They were back in less than 2 hours. First-degree murder conviction does not automatically carry life without parole. The same jury must then enter what is known as a mercy phase. They must decide whether the defendant should be eligible for parole after 15 years, or whether they should die in prison. The mercy phase began the following day. When the prosecution's victim impact witnesses rose to speak, Natalie's family and supporters stood up and walked out of the courtroom. They had sat through every word of the defense. They could not sit through what came next. Then Donna Bolt rose to read her victim impact statement. She had been waiting nearly 6 years to deliver it. Her statement was 8 pages long. She described her daughter-in-law in unsparing terms.
Natalie Cochran and her family have never said they were sorry. We have no choice but to watch in the courtroom with repulsion as she smiles and banters with her family and friends, just like she doesn't have a care in the world. We ask this court that Natalie Cochran be sentenced to life in the state prison for the rest of her natural life, with no pardon, no mercy, and no deals. This evil, narcissistic sociopath intentionally and knowingly pre-planned and committed first-degree premeditated murder, stealing the life of our son, Michael Brandon Cochran, at the young age of 38. To the court, Natalie Cochran will speak at her sentencing today because she has to have the last word. The simple truth is that while growing up, and even as an adult, this spoiled, evil, narcissistic murderer had seldom, if ever, been denied this which she wanted. The word no was not spoken or heard of in her world. She will try to blame my precious son Michael for her evilness and deceit. Natalie may even shed a tear or two, but we have now come to know that every word coming out of Natalie Cochran's mouth will just be another lie, and her tears will be fake tears trying to get sympathy from your court. Natalie is going to use Michael's children to get sympathy here today. She tried to do that with their testimonies during the trial. Judge, please don't fall for her con.
She also reminded the court that as her son lay helpless in hospital, Natalie had still been sending fraudulent documents to potential investors. Ed Bolt's statement was simpler and somehow more painful. He said he missed his stepson every day. He missed the small things, the casual greetings, the everyday phone calls. He said it was the small things he cherished most. The jury retired again. They were back in around 80 minutes. The recommendation was no mercy. According to Tom Truman, it was the first such recommendation against a woman in West Virginia in 34 years. The last had been issued in 1991. On the 25th of February, 2025, Judge Kirkpatrick formally pronounced the sentence. Natalie Page Cochran was committed to the penitentiary of the state for her natural life without the possibility of parole. The case did not end in the courtroom. On the 21st of February, 2025, 3 Raleigh County delegates introduced House Bill 2789. They named it the Michael Brandon Cochran Act. The law addresses the single biggest forensic failure of Michael's case. No C-peptide test had been performed before glucose was administered. Under the new law, any unconscious patient or any patient with a blood glucose level of 49 or below must be tested for C-peptide. Hospitals that fail to comply face a $10,000 fine per violation. The Bolts attended the ceremonial signing on the 9th of April 2025. That is Michael's legacy in the most tangible sense, written into the statute books with his name attached to it. On behalf of the Bolt family, his mother once said that her son had been a beautiful soul. He had been a husband, a father, a son, a stepson, a brother, a coach, a friend. He had been, in the smallest and biggest possible sense, theirs. Please don't forget Michael Brandon Cochran. If this case moved you, leave the words for Michael in the comments, so that this story keeps reaching the people who need to see it.